Cool. So this is the current week's project, or at least up to where we are currently in terms of functionality. And you will notice that as I resize my screen, this does a pretty good job of resizing itself. But you might also think, well, this could be problematic if I get my screen too small, because now this little bar here is tiny. What if I have a really long to do? Maybe I want to put this on its own line so it takes up the entire width of the screen rather than just being this little portion. So we can use a media query on the screen size in order to change the layout of our elements under a certain threshold, which usually would be either have a small screen or a really big monitor. In the case of the big monitor, maybe you can make your layouts a little bit bigger, put more things on the same line. But a smaller screen, like maybe a laptop screen, you might do things a little bit differently. And then more importantly, once you get really small like this to about the size of a phone, then you want your layout to look drastically different. So let's do this really quick. Let's say I want this to be on its own line once our window gets to be a certain size. I have no idea how big this window is right now, but I can figure that out pretty easily. I'm going to open my inspector and I'm going to click this little button up here, which should exist on Chrome as well. And what it does is it allows you to play with the screen size, and it'll actually give you the size of the screen up there in the corner. Normally it'll let you drag things. It's annoying that I can't. Oh, I can drag it. So let's say my screen gets to be about this width. This I think is too small to be on its own line. Any bigger than that, I'm going to say, yeah, that's fine. And then any smaller than this, I want this to be on its own line, separate from the title and ad and everything like that. So let's do it. Let's take this number up here. We're going to say if it's less than 500 pixels in width, we want it to be on its own line. So I'm going to go in here. This is my add to do form. So I'm going to go into that CSS file. And I'm going to leave myself a comment that says if under 500 pixels, put text box on its own line. That's what we're trying to accomplish here. We'll leave this open in another tab here. We'll set this to be some amount lower than 500 just so we can see the results. Cool. So what I can do is I can add a at media only screen, I believe is the syntax. So let's just look it up to make sure I'm getting this correct. Oh, I forgot the and. So media indicates a media query on only the size of the screen. And when that size of the screen is no bigger than a max width of 500 pixels, then here we can style any elements as they should be under this breakpoint. So anything that I style in here is going to change its style only when the screen is less than 500, when the max width is no greater than 500, or the current width is no greater than the max width, rather. And this media query means that my CSS that's normally applied everywhere else by a selector up here is going to be overwritten by whatever selector I have down here. So let's say, let's figure out what this actual thing is so we can put it on its own line. So this is our input element, our label, our input, and our button. Let's figure out why this looks like it does. So this is a flex. This input has padding to the left. So what I want to do is I want to get rid of that padding to the left, and I'm just going to hide the title. And that way our input here is going to take up the rest of the space of the box. It's set to be a width of 100 rather than a fixed amount, so it will fill up as much space as it can, which right now this is taking up space. So I'm going to say under 500 pixels, our label is going to have display of none, which means hide it. And you'll see that it's gone. Move this back. So we want our label to be gone, and then our input, we're going to use the selector, which means an input that is directly after a label, but not a child of it, which in this case, they're just three elements right next to each other. We want this to have a margin of 0. Cool, and so that fills up the rest of the space. Actually, we don't quite want it to have a margin of 0, I don't think, because for some reason that's not lining up with our items. Let's figure out why that is. Ooh, these have a little padding to them. A margin of 5. All right, let's match that. There we go. And now that lines up like we would expect. Cool, so this is a lot bigger now. And you'll notice again, we're under 500 pixels right now. If I go any smaller, it will still take up as much space as it can. This is also really dangerous. Like if we get really low, so maybe we want to do something different with these elements instead. But I'm not going to explore this too much just because I want to move on to the next thing. But once we get to a certain size again, then that comes back and these CSS properties no longer apply. So if I hover over my form, my label right now does not have any extra stylings on it. And when I make it small, then it gets the styling of display none. I'm hiding the title just because it lets our input be a lot bigger. You could find another way to make this input bigger with different CSS properties, but I think that's the easiest way just based on how this project is set up. Personal choice, just to demo. Any questions about this or anything else? All right. If there's no other questions, then we can just keep on trucking. And let's turn this into a TypeScript project. Since this week is officially TypeScript, when I talked about TypeScript in a previous week, I didn't really realize that we were going to have a whole week on it. I was under the impression that it had not been added to the curriculum yet, but I guess it has. So let's take our React project and turn the whole thing into a TypeScript project, just so you can see what that is, what the amount of work is going to be in order to do something like this. And also just so you can kind of see how TypeScript fits into a React ecosystem. We talked about it. We just talked about it at a super high level, like you can apply types to a variable, but we didn't really talk about how that applies to React and what we would want to type, if anything. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to follow this link here, which I will send to all of you guys, but is also on the agenda, which is a GitHub issue on Vite, which just gives some simple steps for how to set up TypeScript on an existing React project already that doesn't have TypeScript in it. So let's follow these instructions. Oops. I'm going to close this agenda. And let's go for it. Oh, excuse me. All right, first steps first, we got to install our packages. So we're going to install TypeScript, which is a package, and then we're going to install at types/react. Anything that's prefixed with at types is basically a package that implements types for a package that is created in normal JavaScript. A lot of people have written very important packages that do really important things, and people use them all the time, but haven't created them with TypeScript and don't really want to. And so there's a community project called Types. Definitely typed. I'm going to put this in our resources as well. And it's a community project that literally just picks existing JavaScript projects and writes types for them, and then release them as their own packages. So we are installing a package that is type definitions for React constructs. Maybe Facebook created these, or maybe it was the community. I don't actually know. But it is important for if we're going to use TypeScript on our project. And then the last thing we need is types React DOM for a similar reason. So I'm going to install these three. Cool. Added, changed. And then we need to update our scripts. So let's go into our scripts. So our Vite script, this just runs Vite. But in order to build, which takes our existing React code and then turns it into vanilla JavaScript, it's telling us that we need to replace the script with TSC, which stands for TypeScript compile. Let's see how this works really quick. If we do npm run. Oh, this isn't going to do anything yet because we don't have any TypeScript packages. All right, we're going to hold off on that. And then we need to add our configuration files, which tell TypeScript what rules it should follow, which I'm not going to try and understand all these rules. Most of them you shouldn't really care about. I would highly encourage just going and picking an example config from the internet somewhere. And then if you want to adjust it later, you're more than welcome to. So tsconfig.json is configuration for the TypeScript compiler and how it's going to work. Like what target version of the language is it going to output for? Where is it going to look for TypeScript files? Stuff like that. And then we also have tsconfig node, which is useful for Vite more than anything. Cool. I'm not even gonna think about this too hard. Let's try this out. So I should be able to convert at this point. Oops. What is this not like? No inputs were found. All right, let's debug this, figure out what's going on. Oops. I guess we just gotta actually add some TypeScript. So let's do it. We're gonna convert all of our JSX files, just rename them as .tsx, which indicates to the TypeScript compiler that it should try to do TypeScripty things to them. And we're going to get a bunch of errors in several of these files, and we're going to go through and fix them. Oh no, I'm going to delete that. All right. So let's do this from top to bottom here. All right. So this function, get element by ID, returns either an HTML element or null. The element with that ID might be there, or it might not. TypeScript does not know. JavaScript doesn't care, but because we're using TypeScript, we are saying we have to very carefully be aware of all the possible types that everything could return. However, we know that this is going to work because we have a public HTML file down here, index.html, and this has our root element, and we're not going to get rid of this because if we got rid of this, React would be non-existent. We wouldn't have any content on our page. It would just be an empty page, and that would be worthless. So I know that this works. So we're going to add a exclamation point at the end, which just indicates that the return here is not null. I know better than the compiler here. And so I'm telling the compiler, just ignore it. It's not going to be. So it gets rid of our error here in main.tsx. Yes, I did undo. I accidentally deleted this add to do form.tsx when I just meant to rename it to .jsx. Everything here should be .tsx at the end. All right, so that's one of our files. Let's check to-do list. What's broken in here? Cool. So it's telling us that these properties have an any type, which is one of the things that we don't like about React that is really dangerous. I'm declaring that I have properties that I'm passing in. This is object destructuring, which means it takes the props object and then automatically turns it into two different properties. But these properties don't have a type. And normal JavaScript doesn't care what you pass in, it's going to use it for that variable. And that might get us into a lot of trouble. So we need to create some types for this. So on remove to do, if I go back and look, the shortcut I'm using here on my Mac is Command click, which shows you all the usages of something. And so I can see that to-do list is used in my app.tsx. I double click to go there. And this remove to do, this is a function that takes an ID, which is a number, and then does something. It doesn't return anything. All it does is update something. So the return type is void. So I need to add this function signature onto that property. So on route to do is a type. int and returns void. But I don't think this is going to work right here. Instead, we need to type the whole object. So this is saying this is our properties. This means the type of this thing is this. And so we're going to say the type of this object is another object, and this object has two properties. To-do list, which is an array of, we'll say, strings for now. We don't have a type for it quite yet. Oop. And it also has a property on remove to do. And this is a function which takes an integer and returns void. I think I'm forgetting how to type function. Let's Google it. I thought I did that. Oh, it's because integer doesn't exist in JavaScript. I'm so smart. All right. We got it. So this is our to-do list. It has two parameters, and then the type is an object with these two properties in it. This is really confusing to me though. So I'm going to create an explicit type called to-do list props. And this is an object, which again, can have keys. So we'll just copy these up here to be keys of this property object. Then we'll say the properties passed to to-do lists are to-do list props. I think this makes more sense to me than writing these directly in there, because then it looks like you have two different forms of the value, which doesn't really make any sense. But now if I hover over here, it doesn't say any. It actually shows us that type that's attached to our to-do list props. Now, this isn't quite right because the to-do list isn't a string. It's an object that has a couple different properties on it, like an ID. And it's also going to have, if we go into our to-do, it's going to have a title as well. And I think there's other properties. But we're going to stick with those for now. Just an ID and a title. So I have my to-do list, but this is not a string. This is another type. To-do item, and it has a title, which is a string. It has an ID, which is a number. Now, I would say that this does not belong in this file necessarily, because there are other things that are also going to have to deal with this type. Our app is responsible for sending and receiving to-do items, so that needs to be able to access this type. And so does our to-do list item, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to make the arbitrary decision to create a models folder. And we're going to add a file in here called todos.ts. So this is just a normal TypeScript file. There's no React, there's no JSX in here. It's just JavaScript and TypeScript. And I'm going to put all my types related to to-do items up here. There might be more. I'm not 100% sure what we're going to need yet, but I'm just starting the organization early. And I need to export these. So we're going to export to do item. Oops, maybe I don't have to do that. Let's try it. So this is a to-do item. And it's a list of them. Interesting. I guess I don't need to explicitly export it if it's a type. That's pretty cool. I click on it, yeah, it just takes me up here. Sweet. Okay, so our type now exists in this todos.ts, and we have an array of those, and our red squiggle down here goes away because now this item is a to-do item, since it's one of the elements in to-do list, and we know it has an ID, and so now everything's okay. All right, this looks good to me. This is all the properties we need for this, and it guarantees that our properties are what we're expecting, and also guarantees that the items that we're mapping are of the right format. If you have prop types, you should get rid of them if you're going to use TypeScript. The prop types just does a little tiny bit of what we did up here by declaring a type for our properties. And I think it does a worse job of it because it doesn't tell you anything. In theory, it doesn't tell you anything while you're actually writing your code. With Vite, it does actually enforce that you need prop types or you have to disable that, which I've done in my Vite config. Nope. Which one? Yeah, I explicitly disabled them because the red squiggles were annoying me. If you didn't have this on, then it would force you to use prop types, but TypeScript does the same thing and more. So if you're using TypeScript, there's no reason for prop types. All right, so that covers our to-do list. Let's jump down into our to-do list item. This one also has a bunch of red squiggles. This CSS module is not going to play nicely with TypeScript. I don't actually have any idea what to do about this. All right. We're not going to go this route because this is stuff that I don't even really know what's going on here. And I am personally just going to scrap the CSS module in favor of regular CSS. So let's do that. To-do list item.module.css. And instead of importing this and then using the styles dot, we're just going to set the class names explicitly. So this one is to-do list item container, which is a valid class name. And then here it's list item, which is still a valid class name. And then down here it's styles, which is still a valid class name. And so I'm just going to get rid of those and just make it a standard CSS import. All right, this looks better. I thought Stack Overflow is telling me I need to do this, but this is not a valid CSS import, at least not the way we're using it. So that's my mistake. All right, so that fixes our CSS. It does the exact same thing as a module. It creates a class with this name, and we just say this item has this class. Does the exact same thing as the module. But it does mean that this class could be in a different component, and then we would still be applying the style there. So it doesn't give us the scoping that a CSS module does, but I'm not worried. I think all of these are distinct names. And I think it should be fine. All right, let's keep rolling. So we got to fix our properties here again. So we're going to create a to-do list item props type and say our to-do has to be of type to-do item, which you remember is that object type that we created. And our on remove to-do, again, is a function with a parameter, which is an ID. And it returns nothing, it returns void. And now we can say our props object is of this type and everything looks good. Our to-do item has an ID because we said it does, and same for title. And everything's good in this world. Yeah, if you want to get rid of it after 3.1, feel free to get rid of that. No, I don't think anyone's going to check if you're still using CSS modules or if you want to swap things up. Or you can continue using the CSS modules if you want to. I can link this if you want to try and work through that. Up to you. Sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah.
All right. Let me
class
just...
name line 12, where you have the dot before class name.
Oh, you're totally right. I should not do that.
Okay, I thought it was
You are
something
totally
new.
right. Nope. Thanks for catching that. This is a class name, so it's just the string, and then when we select it, that's when we use the dot. If I had done that, nothing would have happened once we ran our code. We're not going to be able to run it for a little while though, so because there's still stuff that's broken. All right, let's keep going. To-do list item looks good. To-do list looks good. Main.tsx looks good. Input with label does not look good. Ooh, lots of red lines. Let's go along our same pattern. Input with label props. And this type is to do title, which I think is a string. If it goes in the value of the input, then it should be a string. Or it could be a number, but in our case, it's going to be a string. What else do we have? Handle title change. This is a function, and I don't know what this function does or what the signature is, so I'm going to go look. Our input with label down here, we give it handle title change, and this takes a change event and returns nothing. All right. I'm going to steal this. So what this is saying, if I hover over this on change, this input has a property called on change, which is the event that runs when the content of the event changes. And I think if we give it this type, this is what the function that it accepts. It can either be a change event handler, which is something React defines and has an input element as the parameter, or undefined, which means you haven't given it a function that's going to handle the change. So I think we can do this. And that works. That got rid of our underline, which is great. And then ref is the last thing. Use ref, mutable ref object, undefined. I have no idea what it wants here. This one is baffling. This is a class component, so we're not going to use create ref. Use ref, HTML input element, null. Ooh, do I just have to pass in? All right. So this is another little TypeScript trickery. This question mark means only continue evaluating this chain if this thing is not null or undefined. So what we did is we created a ref of type HTML input element, which just means it's a ref that goes into an input and allows us access to the underlying input element programmatically. And we're going to use it to focus that HTML input element. But this ref starts as null until it renders the first time and assigns the underlying input here to this ref. So we're going to say, if it's still null, then we're not going to focus it. But once this becomes non-null, then it will continue evaluating past and call .focus. And so this will avoid us calling .focus on something that's undefined or null. So that gets rid of that. And then children, I don't know what type this should be either. I think this is going to be something very generic. Yep, React.React node. That's what I thought. So this just means literally any React function or any component can be a child. Cool, and that gets rid of our last squiggle. So children means we're passing in an element that's going to get stuck in here. We have our function that handles the HTML change event, and we have our title. This one was tricky. I did not prepare this in advance, which is why I don't just know these answers. So we're kind of working through this together. All right, another one down. Let's do this one first, because this one will be smaller, and then app.tsx is going to be the really big hard one. All right, we have properties. Add to do is our only property, so I'm going to stick it up here and use our destructuring syntax just because I like that better. And so this property is a function. And it's going to pass back a new to-do object. And we don't get anything back. It's void when we use it down here. So this is a function that returns void. And the property is to-do, which is a to-do item. Cool. And so this is no longer red, and this is no longer red. We're good to use this on add to do, no problem. Yeah, so this is highlighted because our input with label is a function we defined, and we just set the properties here, and it does not accept a class name. So this is a class name that was mistakenly put on this input with label and is not actually doing anything because there is no way to apply a class to just any React component. I could apply a class to an individual React element, like down here, but I can't do it to my component unless I declare that class name property and then do something with it. We're going to get rid of that since it's no longer useful. We still have some prop types down here, which we're going to get rid of. And now we have events. So is this handle title change? And this is a change event handler, which has a property, which is an HTML input element. Cool. This was honestly just a guess, but this does appear to be correct. So our change event, and we're going to give it a type and say the thing that's changing is our HTML input element, which is our input with label. Let's make sure this is still okay. Yeah. And then this one down here, handle add to do. So this is when the form is submitted. I don't think this is what we want. Nope, we want form event. There we go. All right, this is also a little bit of guess and check since it doesn't tell us explicitly down here what the event is, but it makes sense. Our form submits, which is an event on the form, and therefore the event is a form event. And this all looks good to me. All right, last one. Let's figure out what we're doing up here with our app file. We have another module here, which I'm going to get rid of, app.module. So let's just call this app.css. And we're going to import app.css. Then anywhere down here, we have a class. We're going to just replace it. So this is still the class that's defined in our module. So we're just going to replace class name with that. I'm going to update this container though. Be something else. Because I think that is going to conflict with another element. All right. So that looks good on the rendering side of things. We still got a lot to do up here. Remove to do takes an ID. If I had to guess, this is probably supposed to be a number. And to-do list has type never, which means we're going to have to fix that. One other really important thing is setting a type for your state. So this indicates that it's an array of something, but it has no idea what. So we need to tell it it's an array of type to-do item. Array. All right, and so now if I hover over this, it'll tell me it's always an array of to-do items. And I can't set it to null either. Or undefined. I could only set it to an array and it will always be of type to-do item. So that's good. This one gets set for us because a Boolean can only be one thing, so we don't have to explicitly say it. But if we want to be very careful, we can say this is a Boolean. And now anytime that we reference that state, it will automatically recognize that it's to-do items. So that covers our errors down here. Add to do, this is a to-do item object that we're adding. Set to-do list means we're creating a new list from to-do items. And then data is the thing that's being problematic here because it could be, it's just an object of some type, or it could be nothing, depending on what we get back from post to do. So we got to fix this. We got to say post to do is eventually going to return a to-do item that we just posted. So our return type here is to-do item. But this is going to be a promise. Since it's an async function, which means it's going to return it sometime in the future. And it looks like we still have some bugs here because we could actually get through the end of this without returning anything. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to fix this. Our method right now tries to fetch, and if it works, it's going to return our to-do item, which is great. But if it fails, it's going to catch the error down here, but then we don't return anything from this function. So we should return null to indicate it didn't work. And this is going to fix our problem. To do, this is a to-do item that we're creating. This environment variables we're going to have to fix, but I'm pushing that off because I don't know what we're going to have to do about it. ID, this is probably going to be a number. And delete to do returns something here, it returns null. And up here, it doesn't return anything. I'm going to get rid of this. I don't think this needs to return anything. It'll just tell us whether it worked or not. Cool. So this is to-do item or null. If data is equal to null, then we're going to return. Sorry, guys, my brain is not in JavaScript syntax today. Cool. So what this does is it says if data is null, we're not going to do anything with it. We're not going to add it to our to-do list because this is our post to do failed in some way. And TypeScript is smart enough to know that if I've already checked that something is null, then when I use it down here, it can't be null. So it can only be a to-do item and our red squiggle goes away. And now we can combine a to-do item with a list of to-do items. TypeScript is really cool like that. Environment. We're gonna skip those and come back to them. Environment, this one's different. Data.records.map to do. All right, so this is the type we get back from Airtable. I don't actually know what this is gonna be, but I know it's going to have at least these two properties that I care about. And so we can kind of guess. We can say that this has an ID, which is a number, and it has fields, which is an object that has a title property, which is a string. These are the only two things I care about. I don't actually have to go and look myself, but I know it's going to have at least these two and anything else I can discard. And so I'm just going to say that these are the types. Cool. And then the only thing we have left is our environments. Our add to do form. Bad. So we're going to try and re-import this and see if that does any better. Yeah, does it better. All right, let's figure out what this end problem is. All right, let's go add this to our TS config. See if that solves our problem. Whoa, that's crazy. All right, so it just adds a type for Vite that says this is an environment variable, which is a string and has some data in it, and I don't care what they are. All right. I think that fixes all of our problems. I don't know what this is. But let's see if this works. And if it doesn't work, we'll just roll with it. All right, doesn't quite work. Let's figure out why. Oops, it doesn't know main.jsx, so we didn't quite set it up properly. Let's see if this fixes it. Index.html. Our script is now main.tsx. Sweet. That looks a lot better. This is our app. We broke the stylings a little bit when we converted them away from modules. So I'd have to go in and fix that, but our project is now running on TypeScript and we now get all the benefits of it, which means all of our properties are guaranteed to be the right type, and I cannot pass in any property that doesn't match what we tell it. So I can't accidentally pass a number in for this instead of a to-do item. Or if my object isn't of the right format, maybe I'm missing a field or I have one too many, then it's going to complain. And also, more importantly, I think it allows us to officially define what our to-do item looks like. And I think it's really going to help for when you're writing API requests where your data is structured a certain way to represent like a real world thing. And you can tell your API, what is that structure that I'm giving you? And what is the structure that I need to send to my API? And what do I need to get back from it? So I would also, if I had more time, I'd create additional types here. Do item request and to do item response. And this response type is going to be what I get back from Airtable, what I send to Airtable to create a to-do. And then when I do it like this, I can officially tell myself what I'm trying to give to the API and make sure that I'm passing all the right fields. And when I get it back, make sure that I can grab all the right fields from the object and I'm not just sort of guessing what it's going to look like. It forces you to take care of all the possibilities in a way that you don't normally have to with JavaScript. Highly encourage you guys to try this out on your own if you weren't doing this alongside. I think it'll be a good experience for you to work through all these problems again, and also so you can continue working in TypeScript in the future. There's not a whole lot of assignments left, but I think it'll help if you want to keep adding functionality here. All right, it's 9 o'clock. I got to drop pretty hard to go do something else. Thanks for bearing with me for an hour. I will see you guys next week. Same time, same place. Have a good weekend. We'll see you guys next week.